My name is Isabelle Carter, and I'm 32 years old. As I drove toward the coastal town of Fairview, Oregon, my hands tightened around the steering wheel, slick with sweat. 7 years, that's how long it had been since I last saw my parents. And now I was returning, not just as the black sheep they remembered, but with a lieutenant commander's insignia tucked into the side pocket of my duffel. They had always brushed off my Navy career as a phase, some impulsive detour from the corporate ladder they had carefully paved. But tomorrow, at HarborTech's 50th anniversary gala, the company where my father spent his entire career, the truth would surface. I pulled into the familiar gravel driveway and took a long breath before stepping out. The house stood unchanged, its blue shutters slightly faded, the same white hydrangeas blooming beside the porch. Before I continue, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button. If you've ever been overlooked or underestimated by your own family, you'll want to see how the story ends. The moment I stepped inside, the scent of lemon polish and roast chicken hit me like a memory. Everything was the same. The faded portraits in the hallway, the sunken floral couch in the living room, and that ever-present tension, like a ghost that never left. "Isabelle, you actually made it," my mother called out from the kitchen, not even looking up. Her voice carried that flat tone of indifference she reserved only for me, not for my older sister, Camille, the finance prodigy with her face plastered across HarborTech brochures. I dropped my bag and walked slowly through the house, brushing my fingers against the familiar wallpaper and picture frames. My father, Charles Carter, had been a lead engineer at HarborTech for decades, slowly climbing to the boardroom. Our entire family narrative revolved around his achievements, and Camille had followed right behind. She and Peter just moved into a new place, my mother chirped as I stepped into the kitchen. She just got promoted again, Vice President of Strategy. Isn't that something? "That's wonderful," I said, mechanically, like I had rehearsed it 1,000 times. She continued rattling off Camille's milestones, new car, business trips to Singapore, how the CFO complimented her last quarter. Not once did she ask about my life, my deployments, or the command post I'd just completed in Japan. I excused myself and headed to my old room. It looked untouched, varsity swim medals, National Honor Society plaques, a photo from prom night. All relics of the version of me they were proud of before I told them I was enlisting instead of interning at HarborTech. There were no medals here. No framed photo from my officer candidate school graduation. No clippings about humanitarian missions or commendations. Just silence and denial. I sat on the edge of my old bed, fingers tracing the frayed edge of the quilt. I could still hear my father's voice the night I told him, "The military is for people who didn't have options, Isabelle. You were supposed to be more." But that was the thing. I am more. And tomorrow? They're about to find out just how much. My sister Camille had always embraced the family blueprint, thriving under the spotlight, basking in our parents' favoritism, and reminding me at every turn how she was the real success story. I unzipped my duffel bag and carefully removed the navy blue garment bag that held my dress whites. Tomorrow, HarborTech would be hosting its annual leadership gala, and my father had casually mentioned over dinner that the company's CEO, Shannon Murphy, would be visiting the regional headquarters. What they didn't know, what no one in that house knew, was that I had recently been appointed as military liaison for the $1.2 billion naval defense contract between the U.S. Department of Defense and HarborTech. A role I'd earned not by luck or connections, but through years of grueling deployments, technical mastery, and leadership in cyber warfare defense systems, the very systems HarborTech was now developing. My fingers brushed over the silver oak leaves of my lieutenant commander rank, a position I had achieved younger and faster than almost anyone else in my division. At 32, I was one of the youngest women in my field with direct operational authority over tech development, implementation, and security clearance at the national level. I hung the uniform in the back of the closet behind a row of dusty jackets. For tonight, I would endure one last family dinner, a performance of polite condescension and passive-aggressive comparisons. But tomorrow would change everything. The doorbell rang. Camille had arrived, no doubt dressed in something carefully chosen to say casual luxury. I took a deep breath, braced myself like I had for 100 briefings, and descended the stairs. The dining room felt smaller now, cramped not by size, but by oversized egos. Camille breezed in with her husband Peter, all tailored lines and polished charm. My cousin Lauren had also been invited. She was a rising star at a private equity firm in San Francisco and frequently served as Exhibit B in the case against my career choice. "Isabelle, you remember Lauren, don't you?" my mother asked, as if we hadn't spent childhood summers building forts and whispering secrets in this very house. "She just closed another acquisition deal, $400 million. "Hey, Lauren," I said warmly, offering a genuine smile. She grinned and hugged me tightly. "Too long, Izzy," she whispered. "I've missed you." We took our seats and passed around steaming bowls of roast chicken, green beans, and garlic potatoes. My father, Charles, scrolled through his work email at the head of the table while my mother pretended not to notice. "Dad," Camille began, her voice bright with anticipation. "I have some exciting news. Shannon asked me to lead the new cybersecurity strategy initiative." My father looked up, pride shining. "That's impressive. Shannon doesn't hand out assignments like that unless you've earned it." Camille beamed. "It's tied to that massive government contract, you know, the one we've been trying to land for years." Shannon said my fresh eyes might be what the project needs. I blinked. Fresh eyes? The irony nearly made me laugh. That contract? I had final approval on every deliverable. I could kill that project with a single call. My mother leaned forward, already in performance mode. "Tell them about the team, sweetie." Camille straightened. 12 direct reports. 2 senior analysts with decades of experience. I said nothing. But tomorrow, the look on their faces? That would be worth every year of silence. They weren't thrilled about reporting to someone younger, Camille bragged, spearing a roasted carrot, but once they saw the numbers I was pulling, they got over it. "That's wonderful, dear," my mother beamed, then turned to me with a tight, polite smile. "And you, Isabelle? How's your job?" "Still at the same rank." The way she said job instead of career didn't go unnoticed. Neither did the deliberately vague phrasing. In her mind, my work in the Navy was more of a prolonged gap year than a vocation. "Things are going well," I said, keeping my tone even. I had no intention of revealing my promotion. "Not yet. Still a captain or whatever?" my father asked, waving his fork vaguely in my direction. He didn't even try to get the rank right. "Something like that," I muttered, taking a bite of mashed potatoes and resisting the urge to launch into a crash course on military hierarchy. "You know," my mother continued without missing a beat, "Lauren just bought a beautiful condo downtown. 3 bedrooms. Stunning view of the Cascade Mountains." Lauren shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly unhappy at being used as a weapon in another round of subtle familial one-upmanship. "It's really not that impressive," she said modestly. "Just lucky timing with the market." "Still," my mother said, pushing forward, "it's refreshing to see young people building equity, laying down roots instead of hopping from place to place." The barb landed. I'd lived in 4 states and 2 countries in the last 8 years. My mother had always equated stability with worthiness, and my transient duty stations were, in her view, the opposite of respectable adulthood. "Speaking of tomorrow," my father interjected, thankfully shifting the conversation, "Shannon Murphy is coming to review the regional office. It's a big deal. She rarely visits." "I've already finalized my presentation," Camille added, full of pride. She emailed me personally to say she's excited about my innovation proposal. "Is there anything special planned for the visit?" I asked, feigning casual interest. My father nodded. "All-hands meeting. Project reviews. And a big announcement about the defense contract." He paused dramatically. "Some colonel from the Pentagon is supposed to be visiting as part of it. But I doubt they'll send someone that high level. Probably just a major, some checklist person who'll be wowed by our operations." I took a long sip of water to hide my smile. "That sounds interesting." "Not really," Camille scoffed. "Military people rarely understand business. They just follow orders, fill out forms." "Camille," Lauren said gently, "that's not fair." But my sister wasn't done. "Let's be honest. The military is a fallback. People who don't make it in the real world find a uniform and coast behind structure and protocol. My mother nodded solemnly. We always knew you were so smart, Isabelle. It's why it was such a disappointment when you threw it all away. I forced a smile. What exactly do you think I do in the Navy? You know, my father shrugged. Paperwork. Schedules. Chain of command stuff. It's not demanding for someone with your intellect. You'll never really be in charge, Camille added. 10 years from now, you'll still be saluting someone else while I'm running my own division. The words burned, even after years of therapy. I knew their approval shouldn't matter. But some wounds don't fully heal. I think Isabelle made a choice that works for her, Lauren said, voice firm. A waste, my mother declared, sighing dramatically. All that potential. Remember how every teacher said you were born to lead a company? I stared at my plate, letting their voices drift around me, moving on to Camille's vacation to Bali, Peter's latest case win, and Lauren's new portfolio acquisition. Tomorrow, though? Tomorrow, the room would be silent, and I wouldn't have to say a word. No one asked about my recent deployment or the advanced cybersecurity training I had just completed in Virginia. As dessert, a store-bought cheesecake was passed around. My father leaned back in his chair and rested a hand on his stomach. Tomorrow is important, he said, almost to himself. 29 years I've given HarborTech. This contract could finally push me to vice president. I nodded with a neutral expression, all the while knowing tomorrow would change everything, just not in the way he expected. Later that night, I retreated to my childhood bedroom. The wallpaper was still pale yellow with little white sailboats, faded but untouched. I lay on my old twin bed, listening to the familiar creaks of the house settling around me. From down the hallway, I heard my parents talking in low voices. Camille really is exceptional, my mother whispered proudly. Shannon would be foolish not to recognize her as senior leadership material. I closed my eyes and reached under the pillow, fingers tracing the silver oak leaf insignia I had tucked away. The soft metal edges were cool beneath my touch. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. Sleep evaded me as I stared at the glow-in-the-dark stars still clinging to the ceiling, remnants from a time when my potential was measured by report cards and spelling bees, not command briefings and intelligence clearances. Before Camille started at HarborTech. Before I took the oath that changed everything. I remembered it clearly, sophomore year of college, sitting at this same dinner table with a Navy ROTC brochure in hand, explaining how the program would fund my education and offer a purposeful career. The military, my father had said, his face twisted like I'd proposed becoming a magician at kids' parties. That's for people who can't get real jobs, Isabelle. It is a real job, I said quietly. And it's what I want. My mother had exchanged a silent glance with him before responding, but what about law school? Or business? You used to say you wanted to join HarborTech someday. No, I hadn't said that. They had said it. I had just nodded, trying to be the daughter they imagined. When I finally said no, the undermining began. My ROTC achievements? Ignored. My commissioning ceremony? Attended only by Lauren, who drove 3 hours on icy roads to support me after my parents canceled last minute. Meanwhile, my father had framed Camille's offer letter as a junior analyst. My military portrait? Still unframed. Still in a drawer. But I rose anyway. By 23, I was promoted to lieutenant and handpicked for a defense innovation unit. By 26, I became lieutenant commander, leading a task force that uncovered a silent cyber attack targeting our communication satellites, one that could have crippled global operations. Commander Eleanor Grant was the first person who truly saw me. Carter, she had said after a brutal multi-day simulation, sweat dripping from her brow, you don't think like the others. That'll take you places. Under her mentorship, I learned to trust my instincts, see around corners, and use the very thing my family saw as a flaw, my refusal to follow their script, as my greatest strength. And tomorrow? They were going to see exactly what that strength had built. The investigation eventually uncovered a coordinated attempt to breach multiple layers of classified defense systems. The counter-operation I led not only neutralized the threat, but prevented what could have been a catastrophic compromise of critical infrastructure. The success earned me an early promotion to commander and put me squarely on the Pentagon's radar. By then, General Eleanor Grant, recently elevated to Rear Admiral, had become one of my fiercest advocates. She was the one who recommended me for the liaison position with HarborTech. They're developing next-generation cyber systems, she told me in a closed-door meeting. We need someone who understands both the tech and the battlefield, someone who can translate between defense protocol and executive boardrooms. When she pinned the silver oak leaves of commander to my collar just 3 weeks ago, the room was filled with top brass, cybersecurity chiefs, and DoD representatives. But my family wasn't there. I hadn't even told them. After years of being ignored, second-guessed, and belittled, I had stopped reaching for their validation. As far as they knew, I was still somewhere in the Navy, doing something technical. "Commander Carter," Admiral Grant said afterward, gripping my shoulder firmly, "you just became the youngest officer in Cyber Command history to wear that rank. Never let anyone make you small again." I wouldn't. Because tomorrow, for the first time, my family would finally see what I'd accomplished. The HarborTech contract was colossal, $1.2 billion in funding to develop secure military communication and defense systems across air, sea, and cyber domains. As liaison, I had full authority over the technical strategy, budget allocations, and performance benchmarks. In other words, I had final say on the very project my father and sister had built their careers around. For years, they had diminished my path, mocking the very uniform that now gave me the power to influence their professional futures. The irony was surgical. I stepped out of bed and pulled the garment bag from the closet. The midnight blue of my navy dress uniform gleamed softly in the early morning light. My fingers slid over the ribbons and medals stitched carefully across the breast, silent emblems of sacrifice, strategy, and split-second decisions that had changed outcomes most civilians would never understand. The oak leaf insignia on my collar shimmered faintly as I turned the jacket over in my hands. I remembered my father once telling me, "Ranks don't mean much in the real world, Isabelle. Out here, it's about performance, not titles." Tomorrow, he would learn that in my world, this rank was earned precisely by performance, measured through clarity under pressure, tactical brilliance, and decisive action in the face of crisis. I double-checked the fabric for loose threads, polished the buttons, and aligned the ribbons with practiced precision. The ritual calmed me, grounding me against the rising tension of returning home. By the time the sky lightened over the Oregon coast, I had moved past the sting of last night's dismissals. The uniform hung ready. My hair was regulation perfect. My posture was steel. Today, Commander Isabelle Carter would walk into HarborTech, not as the daughter they once doubted, but as the officer whose name would redefine the trajectory of their future. As I pinned the insignia to my collar, I met my own eyes in the mirror and thought, "This is who I've become, and I don't need their applause to be proud of her." I reminded myself, this moment wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. About finally giving my family the chance to see me as I truly was, for better or worse. And if they still couldn't accept that, well, that was their loss, not mine. I glanced at my watch, a sleek, minimal silver piece gifted to me by Admiral Eleanor Grant after my last promotion. The inscription on the back read, "Lead quietly. They'll hear you." It was time. The HarborTech leadership event would begin in just under an hour, and I was expected early to coordinate with their internal security and compliance team. Downstairs, I could hear my parents and Camille moving around, chatting about carpooling. They had no idea I'd be attending, let alone in what capacity. I waited until I heard both car doors slam shut and engines pull away before grabbing my leather portfolio and heading outside. The morning was brisk, the sky cloudless. My car was parked just across the street, already loaded with everything I needed. The drive to HarborTech's coastal headquarters took less than 15 minutes. I used the time to center myself, going over contract notes, security checkpoints, and technical milestones I would be referencing throughout the day. Yes, my family would be present, but this wasn't about them anymore. It was about ensuring a national defense project, Project Trident, was in capable hands. As I pulled into the reserved parking space labeled Military Liaison, DoD clearance required. I straightened my uniform one last time. The weight of the silver oak leaves on my collar settled over me like armor. This was the kind of weight I'd learned to carry with confidence, far more natural than the burden of my family's old expectations. The HarborTech building stood tall before me, a gleaming mass of glass and steel, symbolic of everything my father revered. Inside, some of the most advanced cyber defense tech in the country was being developed, including systems I now had final authority to approve. Security was tight, as expected. As I approached the guard station, 2 officers stiffened at the sight of my rank. "Good morning, Commander," one of them said, recognizing the insignia immediately. "May I see your credentials?" I handed over my military ID and authorization file. "Commander Isabelle Carter, U.S. Navy Liaison for Project Trident." The guard's eyebrows lifted slightly as he scanned my clearance. "Yes, ma'am. You're cleared for the executive wing. They're expecting you in conference room 1. Would you like an escort?" "That won't be necessary," I said calmly. "I know the way." And I did. I had reviewed every floor plan of the building over the last month. As I passed through the glass turnstile, the air shifted. Conversations paused. A few staff nodded respectfully. Others stared, puzzled, likely wondering why a high-ranking Navy officer was strolling through their regional campus. The elevator opened on the executive floor. As I stepped out, I immediately spotted Camille, reviewing notes on a sleek tablet. Her eyes lifted, then widened as they fell on my uniform. "Isabelle, what are you doing here?" she asked, blinking. "Why are you wearing that?" "Good morning, Camille," I replied coolly. "I'm here for the project review." Before she could respond, my father rounded the corner, mid-conversation with 2 other executives. He stopped cold when he saw me. His face morphed from surprise to confusion to something else, concern. "Isabelle," he said slowly, what's going on? Why are you in uniform?" I met his gaze evenly. "Because I'm the one overseeing your project." He glanced around nervously, clearly calculating how this might look in front of his colleagues. His eyes flicked to the silver oak leaves on my collar, then back to the faces of the executives beside him. "Dad," I said with a polite nod, my voice level and professional. "I was just heading into the conference room to finalize some notes." "The meeting starts in 20 minutes, correct?" The 2 men standing beside him, both in tailored suits, were now openly staring at my uniform. One of them, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a legal affairs name badge that read Barbara Jenkins, stepped forward, hand extended. "Commander," she said respectfully, "it's an honor to have you with us. We weren't informed you'd be attending in person today." My father's face had paled, the color draining slowly like a melting snowbank. "Commander. Isabelle? What is this about?" I kept my tone neutral, aware of the growing audience that had begun to form in the corridor. "I imagine CEO Murphy will clarify during the session. If you'll excuse me." I turned and walked toward the conference room, each step steady and controlled. The hallway behind me buzzed with whispers. Training had taught me not to react, but I couldn't deny the quiet satisfaction stirring inside me. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere was one of quiet precision. Staff were arranging water pitchers, organizing presentation tablets, and double-checking the name placards. A young woman placing refreshments froze when she saw me enter. "Oh, Commander. I wasn't aware you were joining us in person. Do you require anything special?" "Everything looks great." "Thank you," I replied, taking my seat at the end of the oval table, the spot designated for the Department of Defense liaison. Over the next 15 minutes, senior engineers, project managers, and directors filtered in. A few paused when they saw me, recovering quickly and introducing themselves with a tone of deference that stood in stark contrast to the dismissive energy I'd received at home the night before. Several even admitted they had expected today's meeting to be virtual. When my father and Camille entered, they both scanned the room as if searching for confirmation that this was real. They sat near the middle, far from where I was seated. Camille cast several puzzled glances in my direction, her polished corporate armor beginning to crack. I didn't look back. At precisely 9 a.m., the doors opened and Shannon Murphy, CEO of HarborTech, entered with her executive team. The room fell quiet at once. She scanned the table, her gaze settling on me with unmistakable recognition. A wide smile crossed her face, and she altered her path immediately, heading straight toward me. "Commander Carter," she said warmly, extending her hand. What a welcome surprise. I thought we were connecting via video today. I rose, returning the handshake firmly. I happened to be visiting family in the area and thought an in-person review would be worthwhile. "Excellent initiative," she said, eyes sharp with approval. "Your presence will be invaluable." She turned to the room. For those unfamiliar, Commander Isabelle Carter is the Pentagon liaison for Project Trident. She holds final approval authority on all cybersecurity protocols, system integrations, and funding allocations. Dead silence. And for the first time in my life, my family finally heard the truth. From across the polished conference table, I saw my father's jaw quite literally drop. Camille was staring at me like she was seeing a ghost, or perhaps someone she'd never truly known. "Good morning, Commander," Shannon continued, offering a respectful nod. "I'm looking forward to your insights today." The meeting began with updates from various department heads. Each presenter addressed both Shannon and me, acknowledging my authority over the military oversight portion of the project. When technical questions arose about compatibility with Department of Defense infrastructure, all eyes turned to me. I answered with precision, breaking down encryption protocols, interface stability benchmarks, and federal compliance standards. With each analysis, I watched my father and sister exchange stunned glances, their carefully constructed understanding of who I was unraveling by the minute. Then came Camille's turn. As the team lead for user interface testing, she began, her voice wavering slightly. "We've proposed a streamlined approach to..." She hesitated mid-sentence as our eyes met. "Please continue, Ms. Carter," I said calmly, my tone strictly professional. To me, she was just another contributor. Not the sister who had once told me, with a smirk, that the Navy was just a detour until I figured out what I actually wanted to do. Camille forged ahead, but her usual polish faltered. She rushed through slides, missed key metrics, and stumbled on technical jargon. When she finally wrapped up, I offered a courteous nod and raised a hand. "I have a few questions," I said evenly. What followed wasn't malicious, just necessary scrutiny. I pointed out inconsistencies in her back-end data assumptions, potential bottlenecks in implementation, and the lack of a contingency plan for downtime scenarios. "These are mission-critical systems," I concluded. "Before this phase is cleared, I'll need a revised proposal that reflects these corrections. Submit it by end of week." My father's face had gone pale. For the first time, he was watching his son's career aspirations held accountable by the daughter he had once dismissed as having no real-world skills. As the meeting progressed, it became clear to everyone that I was not just a uniform at the table. I was the authority. What my family had failed to see for years, my colleagues had long recognized: skill, leadership, and command. 3 hours later, Shannon stood and addressed the group. "Commander Carter will remain on site through tomorrow to complete security assessments. Please ensure she has full access. This project is vital not just to us, but to national security." As the room emptied, Shannon turned to me again. "Commander," she said, smiling, "your reputation is well earned. General Grant speaks highly of you, but seeing you in action confirms everything I've heard." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my father hovering near the edge of the room, clearly eager to speak, but unsure how to approach the woman he now saw in front of him. There was no going back now. Camille stood beside my father, her earlier confidence now replaced by confusion and something else, dawning realization. Shannon gestured toward me, clearly unaware of the family tension radiating beneath the surface. "Commander Carter," she said, her tone warm and professional, "let me introduce you properly to the rest of our senior team. Some of them may already know your name from the project files, but it's always best to connect in person." I gave a crisp nod and joined her small circle. As she placed a hand lightly on my shoulder, a gesture of mutual respect, not hierarchy, I caught the flicker of disbelief in my father's eyes. This kind of deference from a CEO was unimaginable for anyone beneath the executive tier, let alone a daughter he'd written off. Everyone, Shannon began. This is Commander Isabelle Carter, the Pentagon's primary liaison for Project Trident. She's been instrumental in shaping the cybersecurity architecture that underpins everything we're building. The senior VP of Engineering, a tall man with silvering hair and a badge that read Thomas Bailey, extended his hand. Commander, your reputation precedes you. Your white paper on adaptive countermeasures against quantum infiltration? Game-changing. We've already implemented several of your suggested protocols. Thank you, Mr. Bailey, I replied smoothly. It's always good to see theory applied to real-world infrastructure. From behind me, I could feel my father and sister watching the exchange, trying to reconcile the stranger before them with the woman they'd seen as a misstep. Shannon continued the introductions until her hand swept toward my father. And of course, she said brightly, you must know Charles Carter, our Director of Regional Operations. Charles has been with HarborTech nearly 30 years. An awkward silence followed as heads turned. Recognition flickered in several eyes. Then Shannon glanced between us, puzzled. Carter, are you two related? Before I could craft a neutral reply, my father stepped forward stiffly. She's my daughter, he said. His voice carried a roughness that wasn't confusion or embarrassment. It was something I'd never heard from him before, respect, maybe. Or the beginnings of it. Your daughter. Shannon blinked. You never mentioned that your daughter was Commander Carter. The Commander Carter. My father struggled for a response. I wasn't aware of Isabelle's current position. Shannon turned to me. I kept my expression measured. My family and I haven't had much opportunity to discuss my career, I said simply. Camille stepped forward, unable to hold back. You're the one overseeing everything? The commander with full project authority. Yes, I said. I've been the Pentagon liaison on Project Trident for the last 6 months. 6 months, my father echoed, as if the words had no weight. And you didn't tell us? Shannon, sensing the shift, quickly refocused. Well, this is certainly unexpected. Commander Carter, since you're here in person, perhaps you'd like to walk the team through your role. I nodded, grateful for the professionalism. Of course. Project Trident represents a $1.2 billion national security investment. My role is to ensure every element meets Department of Defense standards, technically, strategically, and ethically. I stepped forward and activated the touchscreen display, watching as the overview populated. Let them see it now, all of it. As I spoke, I watched the expressions on the executives' faces shift from polite curiosity to genuine respect. My comprehensive understanding of both the technical framework and strategic impact of the project left little doubt as to why I held my role. All major design decisions, budget allocations, and implementation strategies require my approval before advancing, I said, letting the weight of the words settle across the table. That includes staffing for all key operational roles. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Camille pale slightly, no doubt remembering her boast from the night before about leading a new team on the user interface integration. The subtext was clear. I now had the power to review and potentially restructure everything she had been so proud of. Shannon nodded, visibly pleased with the clarity I brought. As you can all see, we are fortunate to have Commander Carter guiding this initiative. Her experience is unmatched, and her authority on this project is absolute. Several executives nodded in agreement, some quietly scribbling notes. My father remained frozen in his seat, his posture stiff, his expression unreadable. In fact, Shannon added, Commander Carter will be conducting performance evaluations of all team leads over the next 2 days. We want to ensure resources are being directed where they'll have the most impact. Now it was Camille's turn to blanch. Just 12 hours ago, she had laughed over dinner about how my career never quite took off. Now she would sit across from me in a professional capacity, her performance under my review. As the meeting concluded and the room emptied, Shannon pulled me aside. Commander, she said, lowering her voice. I had no idea Charles was your father. This must be a proud moment for your family. I offered a diplomatic smile. It's certainly a significant one. Well, they should be proud. Your work has been outstanding. I've told Charles more than once how lucky we are to have such a strong military partner on this project. My father had been walking up just in time to overhear that. His eyes flicked between us, the emotion behind them hard to read, confusion, perhaps, but also the early signs of regret. Isabelle, he began slowly, as if tasting the name for the first time, unsure of how to address me now. We need to talk. Of course, I replied professionally. I have a brief meeting with the security team, but I can be in your office by 1100 hours. He nodded, almost robotically, unaccustomed to taking instructions from me. As the last of the executives filed out, I overheard fragments of their hushed conversation. Did you know Charles's daughter was Commander Carter? No wonder she rose so fast, must have had connections. No, said Thomas Bailey clearly, she refused to use family ties. Everything she's achieved, she earned on merit. The words seemed to stop my father mid-step. The implication rang out, my career wasn't the result of privilege. It had risen in spite of their absence. At 1100 hours sharp, I knocked on the office door. Through the glass, I saw not only my father, but my mother, Diana, and Camille. Someone had clearly called her in after the morning's revelations. Enter, my father called. His voice lacked its usual certainty. I stepped inside, still in full dress uniform, and closed the door. Diana sat rigidly in one of the visitors' chairs, her eyes flickering between confusion and something dangerously close to fear. Camille stood by the window, arms folded defensively. Please, sit down, my father said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. Thank you, I replied evenly, but I prefer to stand. I responded instinctively, shifting into parade rest, hands clasped behind my back. The old muscle memory came as easily as breathing. Silence stretched through the office, thick and uncomfortable, until my father finally spoke. Why didn't you tell us? He asked quietly. All this time we thought. You thought what, Dad? I replied calmly, not moving. That I was wasting my potential? That I'd never amount to anything in uniform? That I was hiding from the real world because I couldn't handle competition? I quoted back their past comments, each one delivered over the years with subtle dismissiveness. But my voice didn't rise. I didn't need to shout. The facts spoke louder than emotion ever could. We didn't know, my mother interjected softly. How could we have known if you never told us? I did tell you, I replied, leveling my gaze on her. I sent invitations to every promotion ceremony. I called after each new assignment. I even emailed you articles when my work was declassified enough to be acknowledged. You just didn't want to see it. But a commander, my father murmured, the rank still catching in his throat. That's very high up. Yes, I confirmed. Roughly equivalent to a vice president in corporate terms. That analogy landed with surgical precision. I watched both my father and Camille sit a little straighter in their chairs, visibly recalibrating their understanding. And you have authority over our contract? Camille asked, voice sharpened with accusation. Is that why you came home? To ambush us? To embarrass me in front of Shannon? I came home because it's been 7 years, I replied evenly. And despite everything, you're still my family. The timing of the contract review was coincidental, though I'll admit, it's convenient. Convenient, my father echoed bitterly. You show up at my workplace in uniform, unannounced. Do you have any idea what this looks like? People will think I pulled strings to get you assigned here. I couldn't help it, I laughed. Dad, I've spent my entire career avoiding any connection to HarborTech precisely to prevent that perception. Admiral Grant assigned me this project because of my background in adaptive cyber defense and my record on high-risk implementations. Admiral Grant? My mother asked. My mentor, I said. And my commanding officer. She's been everything you could have been, supportive, challenging, proud of me. And she never once asked me why I didn't work for HarborTech. My mother flinched, and even Camille looked away. So this is about proving us wrong, Camille said, her voice rising. About making us look foolish. No, I said firmly. This is about doing my job. The one I've trained for. The one I've bled for. That you never took it seriously, that's your issue, not mine. My father stood, fists clenched. You should have warned us. We went on thinking you were just some junior officer pushing papers. Would it have mattered? I asked quietly. Last night, none of you asked a single real question about my life. It was all about your achievements. Not once did you ask about me. A heavy silence followed. We always wanted what was best for you, my mother offered weakly. No, I said gently. You wanted what you thought was best. And when I didn't follow your plan, you dismissed me. My father sat back down slowly, the heat in his voice finally giving way to exhaustion. Your sister followed the path. She's doing well. I'm happy for Camille, I said sincerely. But that was never going to be my path. I needed something different. Camille uncrossed her arms, her defensive stance finally starting to soften. All these years, she said quietly, we thought you were just stuck. Going nowhere. I know what you thought, I replied evenly. You made it very clear every time we spoke. You'll never be anything in the Navy, those were your exact words, Camille. Last night. She looked down ashamed. I didn't know. You never asked, I pointed out. None of you did. My mother stood abruptly. Her expression flickered from guilt to strained cheerfulness. Well, now we do know. And of course, we're very proud. I always told your father the Navy was a respectable career. The revisionist history was so typical it almost made me smile. Mom, I said gently but firmly, don't do that. Don't rewrite the past just to make this easier. If we're going to move forward, we have to be honest about how things really were. Otherwise, there's no point. She opened her mouth, then closed it, clearly unaccustomed to being contradicted so directly. Isabelle, my father said at last, using my first name, not my rank, for the first time since the meeting that morning. What do you want from us? An apology? Recognition. What I've always wanted, I replied. Respect. Acknowledgement that my path, while different, still has value. That it matters. That I matter. The room went quiet as my words settled between us. Then my father stood and walked toward me. For a moment, I thought he might try to hug me. But instead, he stopped and extended his hand. Commander Carter, he said formally, voice rough with emotion, I owe you an apology. A significant one. I failed to understand what you were doing with your life. I judged it through a lens of ignorance and pride. And I was wrong. The formality of the gesture was so characteristic of him. And yet, the humility behind it was entirely new. I took his hand. Thank you, Dad. I still don't understand all of what you do, he added. But I'd like to. If you're willing to teach me. It was more than I had expected. And I felt a knot inside me begin to unwind. I'd like that, I said softly. My mother stepped forward next, more hesitant. We should have come to your ceremonies, she said. I would have liked to see you honored. It wasn't a full apology. But it was as close as she could get. I nodded. It was enough for now. Camille still stood by the window. She looked over at me, eyes thoughtful. So, you outrank me by a lot. This isn't a competition, Camille. It always has been, she said, surprisingly candid. Mom and Dad set it up that way. I just followed the path they understood. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in years. We chose different roads. Both can have value. She nodded. What I saw today, the technical stuff alone, I could never do what you do. And your leadership presence? It was impressive. Really impressive. Coming from Camille, that was as close to a full apology as I'd ever get. Thank you. My father cleared his throat. Shannon wants to have dinner with all of us tonight. Now that she knows we're family. She's quite impressed with you. I know, I said, allowing myself a small smile. He chuckled, shaking his head. Of course you know. You probably understand this company better than I do at this point. Maybe I did. But more importantly, I finally knew my worth. Only the classified parts, I said with a smirk. My father let out a genuine laugh, perhaps the first we'd shared in years. The tension that had once saturated the room had shifted into something more fragile, something hopeful. There was still damage, years of being dismissed, misunderstood, and underestimated, but for the first time, I felt like they were truly seeing me. I have another meeting to attend, I said, glancing at my watch, but I'd be happy to join you for dinner with Shannon tonight. As I turned to leave, my mother's voice stopped me. Isabelle, we. She struggled with the words. I know, Mom, I said gently, pausing at the door. One step at a time. And with that, I left them to process this new reality, that the daughter and sister they had underestimated wasn't some forgotten footnote in a rigid family plan. She was Commander Isabelle Carter, and she had earned every ounce of the respect now surrounding her. 6 months later, I stood at the kitchen counter of my Washington, D.C. apartment, watching the golden-orange light of sunset reflect off the Potomac River through the large windows. The spacious, two-bedroom condo, a quiet sanctuary tucked above the chaos of Capitol Hill, was a far cry from my childhood home in Fairview. It had become a place of peace, of clarity. Tonight, I was hosting my family for dinner. Things weren't perfect, but they were better. My father, Charles, arrived first, holding a framed article with awkward pride. "I had this mounted," he said, holding it out. "Been hanging it in my office since the launch. Thought you might want a copy, too." It was the piece from Defense Today, featuring a photo of me in full dress uniform, standing with Admiral Eleanor Grant and Shannon Murphy at the successful rollout of Project Trident. "Thank you, Dad," I said, genuinely touched. 6 months ago, he might have brushed off that article as irrelevant. Now, he saw it for what it was, a milestone. My mother, Diana, followed soon after, balancing a still-warm homemade apple pie, my childhood favorite. She no longer compared me to Camille. Instead, she asked real questions about what I did, where I had traveled, and what it felt like to lead. "Your apartment is lovely, Isabelle," she said, admiring the space. "So neat. So precise. Military precision," I joked. She laughed, and this time, it wasn't followed by a critique. Camille and Peter arrived last, bringing an expensive bottle of Bordeaux. The most surprising shift had been with my sister. After the shock faded, she'd started asking me real questions. We had begun to rebuild, not as competitors, but as equals. "So," Camille said, pouring wine as we settled into the living room, "I implemented one of the security suggestions you made. The team thought I was a genius." I raised an eyebrow. "Did you give credit where it was due?" She smirked. "Eventually. After I enjoyed the praise for about 5 minutes. I chuckled. "Well done. Implementation matters." Her smile softened. "Thanks. It meant something, hearing that from you." That simple, professional acknowledgement held more weight than years of family tradition. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen, not just as their daughter, but as their equal. Not just their daughter. Not just a little sister anymore. My father, who had been slowly studying the modest row of military awards and commendations on my bookshelf, turned toward me. "I read that article," he said, gesturing toward the framed piece from Defense Today. "The one about the cyber attack you helped stop last year." I didn't understand all the details, but it sounded serious. "It was," I said, nodding. "We caught it early. Thankfully." The breach had the potential to compromise multiple systems. "Were lives at stake?" he asked, his expression beginning to shift from polite curiosity to something deeper, understanding. "Potentially, yes. Infrastructure security affects everything from hospitals to communications. If we hadn't stopped it, civilian systems could have been shut down." He nodded slowly. "I always thought military service meant boots on the ground, combat in deserts or jungles. I never really pictured a cyber battlefield." "Most people don't," I said. "Which is part of why it works. The enemy doesn't always see us coming." Before he could reply, the doorbell rang. I excused myself to answer it and opened the door to find Brigadier General Eleanor Grant standing in the hallway, her posture impeccable despite being off duty. "Commander Carter," she greeted me with a warm smile. "General Grant," I returned. "Thank you for coming." I'd invited her not only because she was in town for briefings at the Pentagon, but because I wanted my family to meet the woman who had believed in me long before anyone else had. Back in the living room, I made the introductions. "Everyone," I said, "this is Brigadier General Eleanor Grant, my commanding officer and mentor." My father stood immediately, extending his hand with the kind of respect he reserved for corporate CEOs. "General Grant, it's an honor. I understand we have you to thank for recognizing Isabelle's potential." Eleanor shook his hand firmly. "The potential was always there, Mr. Carter. I simply gave her the room to realize it." My mother stepped in, smiling nervously. "General, please, make yourself comfortable. Dinner is nearly ready." At the table, something remarkable happened. The conversation flowed. Eleanor's presence seemed to soften the room, her anecdotes about military life helping bridge a gap I'd long thought permanent. She designed a simulation program that's now standard in cybersecurity training, Eleanor told them over dinner. Her approach has reduced simulated breach rates by over 60%. It's changed how we prepare. I watched as my parents really listened for the first time. We didn't know, my mother said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. All these years, we didn't know what you were really doing. You never asked, I replied, without resentment. 6 months ago, those words would have carried a sharp edge. Now, they were just truth. But now you do. And that's what matters. Later, as we cleared the table, Camille stood beside me in the kitchen. You know, she said quietly, I spent years thinking I was ahead, climbing ladders, making moves, but you were playing a whole different game. It wasn't a competition, I reminded her gently. I know that now, she said. And I'm sorry for making it one. Moments like this would have felt impossible just 6 months ago. But now, everything had changed. The healing wasn't complete. Maybe it never would be. But it was real, and for the first time, it felt possible. Later, as we shared coffee and slices of my mother's homemade apple pie, my father lifted his glass. To Commander Isabelle Carter, he said, his voice steady, threaded with a pride I had never heard before. Who showed us all that forging your own path can lead to truly extraordinary places. We may have taken too long to see it, but we couldn't be prouder now. I raised my glass with the others, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, not in Fairview, not even in uniform, peace. The validation I'd once longed for no longer defined me. But their recognition? It was still healing. In the end, it had never been about proving them wrong. It was always about becoming the person I was meant to be, whether they saw it or not. That they finally did wasn't the victory. The real victory was in choosing myself from the beginning. What about you? Have your achievements ever been dismissed by people who should have believed in you? Share your story in the comments, and if this resonated, like and subscribe for more stories of resilience, purpose, and power. Your path is valid no matter who fails to see it.